The security camera footage was crystal clear. There she was, Sheriff Corinne Williams, sitting in my garage with her boots up on my workbench, eating her lunch like she owned the place. But that was not even the worst part. The worst part was what I discovered when I checked the timestamps. She had been using my garage as her personal office for 3 months. 3 months of filing fake overtime reports. 3 months of conducting illegal searches from my property. 3 months of violating every oath she had ever taken. And when I finally confronted her about it, she looked me dead in the eye and said something that changed everything. She said I would never be able to prove it. My name is David Parker, and for 43 years of my life, I believed that if you worked hard, paid your taxes, and treated people with respect, the system would protect you. I was wrong. I lived in Cedar Falls, a town where everybody knew everybody, and the biggest excitement was usually the annual corn festival. My house sat on Maple Street, a quiet neighborhood where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved from their front porches. I had spent 15 years turning that house into something I was proud of. Fresh paint every few years, a lawn that stayed green even in August, and a 2-car garage that I kept organized like a small workshop. Every evening at 5:30, I would pull into my driveway after my shift at the hardware store. I would press the garage door opener, drive inside, and close the door behind me. It was routine. It was peaceful. It was mine. That routine lasted until the day I met Sheriff Corinne Williams. It started with Mrs. Henderson next door. She had called the police about teenagers cutting through her yard, and when I came home that Tuesday, there was a patrol car blocking my driveway. Not parked beside it, blocking it completely. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, waiting for whoever was inside to move. The engine ticked as it cooled, and I could see neighbors peeking through their curtains. Finally, I got out and walked over to the patrol car. Sheriff Williams was sitting behind the wheel, talking on her radio and completely ignoring me. She was a woman in her late 40s with short gray hair and the kind of permanent scowl that said she had been dealing with idiots all day. Her uniform was pressed and perfect, and her badge caught the afternoon sunlight. I tapped gently on her window. She looked at me like I had just interrupted the President of the United States. She rolled down the window an inch. "What do you want?" she said. "I am sorry to bother you, but you are blocking my driveway. I just need to get into my garage." She stared at me for a long moment, then looked at my house, then back at me. "I am conducting official police business. You can wait." "I understand, but could you maybe pull forward a few feet? I just need enough room to." "I said you can wait." She rolled up the window and went back to her radio conversation. I stood there for another 10 minutes while she finished whatever she was doing. When she finally moved her car, she did not apologize. She did not acknowledge me. She just drove away like I had never existed. That night, I told my wife Linda about the encounter over dinner. She shook her head and said that some people just had bad days. She was probably right. Sheriff Williams was probably dealing with stress, or maybe she was having problems at home. People deserved the benefit of the doubt. But as I lay in bed that night, I kept thinking about the way she had looked at me. It was not the look of someone having a bad day. It was the look of someone who believed that her badge gave her the right to treat other people however she wanted. I should have trusted that instinct. The second time Sheriff Williams blocked my driveway, I thought it was just bad luck. The third time, I started to wonder if it was intentional. By the fifth time, I knew it was. She would park her patrol car right across the entrance to my driveway at least twice a week. Sometimes she would be there for 20 minutes. Sometimes it was an hour. And every time I approached her, she would give me the same cold stare and tell me she was conducting official business. The problem was that I could never figure out what that business was. She would sit in her car, sometimes on her radio, sometimes just staring at her phone. There were no emergencies on our street, no crimes being investigated, no reason for a sheriff to be parked in front of my house for an hour at a time. After 2 weeks of this, I decided to call the police station. Cedar Falls Sheriff Department, this is Deputy Martinez. Hi, I would like to speak with someone about Sheriff Williams. I have been having some issues with. Is this an emergency? No, but. Then you need to file a complaint in person during business hours. The line went dead. I drove to the station the next day during my lunch break. The building was a small brick structure that looked like it had been built in the 1970s and never updated. Inside, a bored-looking receptionist sat behind bulletproof glass. I would like to file a complaint about Sheriff Williams, I said. What kind of complaint? She keeps parking her patrol car in my driveway and refusing to move when I ask her. The receptionist looked at me like I had just told her that aliens had landed in my backyard. The sheriff parks where she needs to park to do her job. If you have a problem with law enforcement doing their job, maybe you should ask yourself why. I am not trying to interfere with police work. I just want to be able to get into my own driveway. I will make a note of your concern, she said, and I could tell from her tone that no note was going to be made. That same week, things got worse. I came home on Thursday evening to find Sheriff Williams sitting in my garage, not in her patrol car, in my garage. She had somehow opened the door and was sitting on my workbench, eating a sandwich and going through paperwork. I stood in the doorway, completely stunned. "Excuse me," I said, "this is my garage." She looked up from her sandwich with that same annoyed expression. "I am using this space for official police business. You need to leave. This is my property. You cannot just. Are you refusing to cooperate with a law enforcement officer?" The way she said it made my blood run cold. There was a threat in her voice that I had never heard before. This was not about parking anymore. This was about power. "No, I am not refusing to cooperate. I just do not understand why you need to be in my garage." "Because I said so." She went back to her paperwork, and I went into my house. But I stood at the kitchen window and watched her through the glass door that connected the garage to the house. She stayed there for another hour, making phone calls and filling out forms like she was sitting at her own desk. When Linda came home from her book club that night, she found me sitting at the kitchen table with my head in my hands. "What happened?" she asked. I told her about finding Sheriff Williams in our garage. I told her about the threats and the attitude and the complete dismissal of my rights as a property owner. Linda sat down across from me and took my hands. "David, this is not normal. Police officers do not just take over people's garages. Something is very wrong here." She was right. Something was very wrong, but I had no idea how wrong things were about to get. By the end of that month, Sheriff Williams had turned my garage into her personal office space. She would arrive at random times, open the door with some kind of tool or key I had never given her, and conduct what she called official business for hours at a time. I started keeping a notebook. Every time she was there, I wrote down the date, the time, and how long she stayed. I noted what she was doing and what she said to me when I tried to talk to her. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. She was using my garage to fill out reports. She was making personal phone calls. She was eating her meals. She was even taking naps in her patrol car while it was parked inside my garage. And every single time I questioned her about it, She would threaten me with arrest for interfering with police business. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. I pulled into my driveway to find my garage door wide open and Sheriff Williams inside, but this time she was not alone. There was a man in handcuffs sitting on my workbench while she filled out paperwork. She was conducting an arrest in my garage. I got out of my truck and walked over to them. "Sheriff Williams, you cannot arrest people in my garage. This is my private property." The man in handcuffs looked at me with desperate eyes. "Please, sir, I did not do anything wrong. She just grabbed me off the street and brought me here." Sheriff Williams stood up and stepped between us. "Mr. Parker, you need to go inside your house right now, or I will arrest you for obstruction of justice." "This is obstruction of justice. You are using my property to conduct illegal arrests." "Nothing I do is illegal. I am a sworn law enforcement officer." "That does not give you the right to take over my garage." She stepped closer to me, and I could see the anger in her eyes. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Parker. This badge means I can go wherever I need to go and do whatever I need to do to keep this community safe. If you have a problem with that, then maybe you are the kind of person this community needs to be kept safe from." That night, after she had finally left with her prisoner, I sat in my garage and really looked around for the first time. There were papers scattered on my workbench, coffee stains on my concrete floor, her personal items stacked in the corner like she lived there. But the most disturbing thing I found was a folder full of reports with my address listed as the location where various police activities had taken place. Traffic stops that had happened in my garage, arrests that had been processed from my property, overtime claims for hours she had spent doing paperwork at my workbench. Sheriff Williams was not just using my garage. She was committing fraud. She was filing false reports. She was claiming overtime pay for sitting in my garage eating sandwiches and taking naps. I took pictures of everything. Every document, every coffee stain, every piece of evidence that she had been treating my garage like her personal police station. Then I went inside and called Linda. "We need to call a lawyer," I said. "What did she do now?" "She is stealing from the county. She is filing false reports. She is using our garage to commit crimes." Linda was quiet for a long moment. "David, if you are right about this, if she is really doing what you think she is doing, then she is going to try to destroy us when we expose her." "I know. Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked out the window at my garage, where the lights were still on and Sheriff Williams' coffee cup was still sitting on my workbench. "Linda, if we do not stop her, she is going to keep using our home to commit crimes. She is going to keep threatening us. She is going to keep acting like she owns our property. And eventually, she is going to do something that we cannot come back from. Then we better make sure we have enough evidence to bury her." That was the night I decided to fight back. That was the night I stopped being a victim and started being a hunter. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to the hardware store, I went to the public library and spent 6 hours researching property rights, trespassing laws, and police misconduct procedures. What I learned made my blood boil. Sheriff Williams had been violating my Fourth Amendment rights every single day for months. She had no legal authority to enter my garage without a warrant or my permission. She had no right to use my property for police business. And the false reports she was filing were felony offenses that could land her in prison for years. But I also learned something else. Proving police misconduct was nearly impossible unless you had overwhelming evidence. Internal affairs investigations usually resulted in paid suspensions or transfers to other departments, and officers who filed false reports often claimed they were just making paperwork errors. I needed more than photographs and a notebook. I needed video evidence. I needed audio recordings. I needed proof that was so clear and undeniable that no one could ignore it or explain it away. That afternoon, I drove to the electronics store in the next town over and bought 4 wireless security cameras, a digital recorder, and a motion-activated system that would capture everything that happened in my garage. I also called my friend Mike, who had been a public defender for 20 years before retiring. Mike, I need some legal advice, and I need you to keep this conversation confidential. What kind of trouble are you in, David? I told him everything. The parking, the garage takeover, the false reports, the threats. Mike listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. David, what you are describing is criminal behavior. This sheriff is committing multiple felonies, and she is using the power of her office to intimidate you into silence. What can I do about it? You need to document everything. Every interaction, every violation, every threat. You need video evidence, audio recordings, and written records with dates and times. And then you need to take it to the FBI. The FBI, local law enforcement, will not investigate their own sheriff. You need federal intervention. What if she finds out what I am doing? Mike was quiet again. David, if this woman is as corrupt as you think she is, then she will do whatever it takes to protect herself. You need to be very careful, and you need to be very smart. That evening, I installed the security cameras in my garage. I placed them in corners where they would not be easily noticed, but where they would capture everything that happened. I set up the recording system in my basement, where Sheriff Williams would never think to look. I also started carrying a small digital recorder in my pocket. Every time she spoke to me, every threat she made, every illegal order she gave, I would have it on tape. The hardest part was acting normal. When Sheriff Williams showed up the next day and made herself comfortable on my workbench, I had to pretend that nothing had changed. I had to let her think that she was still in control. But inside, I was counting down the days until I had enough evidence to destroy her career. "Good evening, Sheriff Williams," I said when I found her in my garage that Wednesday. She looked up from her paperwork with that familiar scowl. "What do you want, Parker?" "Nothing, just checking to make sure you have everything you need." She stared at me suspiciously. "Since when do you care what I need?" "I just want to be helpful." She went back to her paperwork, but I could tell she was watching me out of the corner of her eye. She knew something was different, but she could not figure out what. That was fine with me. Let her wonder. Let her worry. Because in 2 weeks I was going to have enough evidence to end her career forever. 3 weeks of recording had given me everything I needed. Hours of video footage showing Sheriff Williams treating my garage like her personal office. Audio recordings of her threatening to arrest me for asking her to leave my own property. Written documentation of every false report she had filed using my address. But I wanted more than just evidence of her crimes. I wanted her to experience the same helplessness she had put me through. I wanted her to know what it felt like to have someone else control your life. That was when I came up with the plan. Sheriff Williams had fallen into a predictable routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she would arrive at my garage around 2 in the afternoon for what she called her administrative break. She would park her patrol car inside, close the garage door for privacy, and spend at least 2 hours doing paperwork, making phone calls, and sometimes taking naps. She had gotten so comfortable with this arrangement that she had started leaving her personal belongings in my garage. Her coffee mug, her reading glasses, a small pillow she used when she napped in the front seat of her patrol car. My garage had become her second home, and she treated it with the casual disrespect of someone who believed she owned it. Linda and I had planned a vacation to visit her sister in Colorado for the last week of November. We had booked the trip months earlier, before any of this started. But now, that vacation was going to serve a different purpose. On the Tuesday before we left, I made sure everything was ready. The security cameras were recording to a cloud server that Sheriff Williams could never access or delete. I had copies of all her false reports stored in 3 different locations, and I had spoken with Mike about exactly what would happen when I returned. That afternoon, Sheriff Williams arrived right on schedule. She parked her patrol car in my garage and settled in for her usual routine. She had no idea that this would be the last time she would ever use my property for her illegal activities. I waited until she had been inside for an hour. I knew from weeks of observation that she would leave her patrol car to use the bathroom in the gas station across the street around 3:30. She always left the garage door open when she did this, and she was always gone for at least 10 minutes. At 3:25, I watched from my kitchen window as she walked across the street. As soon as she disappeared into the gas station, I moved. I ran to my garage and grabbed the remote control for the garage door opener. Sheriff Williams had left her patrol car parked in the center of the garage, surrounded by all her personal belongings and paperwork. Her coffee was still warm on my workbench. I pressed the button, and the garage door came down with a satisfying thud. Then I ran to my car and drove away. Linda was waiting for me at the airport with our luggage already checked. She looked nervous but determined. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as we walked toward our gate. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. What if she calls the police? She is the police, and she is going to have to explain to her supervisors why her patrol car is locked in a private citizen's garage while she is supposed to be on duty. We boarded our flight to Denver, and as the plane lifted off, I looked down at the lights of Cedar Falls getting smaller below us. Somewhere down there, Sheriff Williams was probably standing in front of my garage, trying to figure out how she was going to get her patrol car out without admitting that she had been using my property illegally for months. I had spent 3 months being her victim. Now it was her turn to be mine. The phone calls started before we even landed in Colorado. 17 missed calls from Sheriff Williams. 12 voicemails that grew progressively more desperate and angry, but I did not answer any of them. I was on vacation, she could wait. The voicemails from Sheriff Williams were fascinating to listen to. They told the story of a woman watching her carefully constructed world collapse in real time. The first few messages were angry and demanding. "Parker, you open that garage door right now. This is Sheriff Williams, and I am ordering you to return my patrol car immediately." By the fourth message, the anger had turned to panic. "Look, Parker, I know we have had our differences, but this is a county vehicle. You cannot just lock up county property. Call me back as soon as you get this." The seventh message revealed just how much trouble she was in. "Damn it, Parker, my supervisor is asking questions. I need that car back today. I will forget all about our little disputes if you just open the door and let me get my vehicle." But my favorite message was number 12. "Please, Mr. Parker, I am begging you. They are threatening to suspend me without pay. My husband does not know about any of this. Please just call me back. We can work something out." I played that message for Linda while we sat on the hotel balcony in Denver, looking out at the mountains. She sounds terrified, Linda said. Good, she should be. By the third day of our vacation, the local news had picked up the story. Mike called to tell me that Channel 7 had run a segment called Sheriff's Car Trapped in Resident's Garage During Mysterious Dispute. They are not getting the full story yet, Mike said over the phone, but people are asking questions. The county commissioners have ordered an internal investigation. What kind of questions? The obvious ones. Why was Sheriff Williams' patrol car in your garage? What official business was she conducting there? How long has this been going on? And what is she telling them? That is the interesting part. She is claiming that you gave her permission to use your garage for police work, but she cannot explain why you would suddenly revoke that permission and trap her car. I laughed. So she is admitting that she has been using my garage for police work. Exactly. And every report she has filed listing your address as the location of official police business is now evidence that she has been conducting unauthorized activities on private property. The story grew bigger every day. By the end of the week, it had been picked up by state news outlets and social media. The comment sections were brutal. Why does a sheriff need to use someone's garage for police work? This sounds like corruption to me. How is this woman still employed? But the most damaging coverage came from an investigative reporter who had started digging into Sheriff Williams' overtime records. She had been claiming overtime pay for hours spent in my garage, billing the county for what she called administrative duties and report writing. The reporter calculated that Sheriff Williams had stolen over $15,000 in fraudulent overtime pay just in the months she had been using my garage. Meanwhile, other residents of Cedar Falls started coming forward with their own stories about Sheriff Williams, a business owner who said she had demanded free meals in exchange for not writing parking tickets, a teenager who claimed she had threatened to arrest him for skateboarding unless he mowed her lawn for free, an elderly man who said she had used his driveway to conduct personal business while on duty. The picture that emerged was of a law enforcement officer who had been abusing her authority for years, and no one had been willing to challenge her until now. By the time Linda and I returned from Colorado, Sheriff Williams was on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Her patrol car was still locked in my garage, but now it was considered evidence in a criminal case. The FBI had taken over the investigation from the county. Federal agents were interviewing witnesses, reviewing documents, and building a case for multiple felony charges. And Sheriff Williams was no longer the powerful authority figure who could park wherever she wanted and threaten anyone who questioned her. She was just another suspect in a federal corruption investigation. When we pulled into our driveway after the flight home, there were news vans parked on our street and reporters waiting to ask us questions. But I walked past them without saying a word. I had already said everything I needed to say. The evidence spoke for itself. The federal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks of our return from Colorado, FBI agents had executed search warrants on Sheriff Williams' home, her office, and her personal vehicles. What they found was a pattern of corruption that went far beyond using my garage. Agent Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, called to update me on their findings. Mr. Parker, we want to thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. The evidence you provided has been instrumental in building our case. What exactly did you find? Sheriff Williams has been systematically defrauding the county for at least 3 years. false overtime claims, misuse of county resources, accepting bribes from local businesses, and using her office to intimidate citizens who complained about her behavior. How much money are we talking about? Our forensic accountants estimate that she stole over $60,000 in fraudulent overtime and kickback payments. The criminal charges were filed on a Tuesday morning in December. Sheriff Corinne Williams was arrested at her home by federal agents and charged with conspiracy to defraud the government, filing false reports, extortion, and violation of civil rights under color of law. The perp walk was broadcast on every local news station. Sheriff Williams, the woman who had spent months intimidating me and treating my property like her personal kingdom, was led away in handcuffs like any other criminal. But the criminal charges were just the beginning. Mike had helped me file a civil lawsuit against both Sheriff Williams and Cedar Falls County for the months of harassment, property violation, and emotional distress I had endured. The lawsuit detailed every instance of trespassing, every false report filed from my garage, and every threat she had made against me. The county tried to settle out of court, but I refused. I wanted a public trial. I wanted everyone to see exactly how Sheriff Williams had abused her power and violated my rights. The civil trial began in February, and it was everything I had hoped for. Mike presented our case methodically, showing the jury hours of security camera footage of Sheriff Williams treating my garage like her personal office. He played audio recordings of her threatening to arrest me for asking her to leave my own property. He showed them the false reports she had filed, claiming county overtime for hours spent eating sandwiches on my workbench. Sheriff Williams' defense attorney tried to argue that she had been conducting legitimate police business, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury saw through her lies in less than 2 hours of deliberation. But the most satisfying moment came when Sheriff Williams herself took the stand in her own defense. "Sheriff Williams," Mike said during cross-examination, "did you have Mr. Parker's permission to use his garage for police business?" The garage was available for official use." "That is not what I asked. Did Mr. Parker specifically give you permission to enter his garage?" She stared at him for a long moment, and I could see the same arrogance in her eyes that I had seen for months in my own garage. "I did not need his permission. I am a law enforcement officer." "So you are admitting that you entered his property without permission?" "I entered his property in the course of my official duties. To eat lunch, to take naps, to file overtime reports." Her lawyer objected, but it was too late. She had admitted everything. The jury awarded me $250,000 in damages. The county was ordered to pay an additional $100,000 in punitive damages and attorney fees. But more importantly, Sheriff Williams was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for her crimes. 4 years to think about what it meant to abuse the trust that citizens place in law enforcement officers. 4 years to understand that no badge gives anyone the right to treat other people like property. The day she was sentenced, I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched as the judge read her crimes aloud. Conspiracy, fraud, extortion, civil rights violations. She looked smaller than I remembered. Without her uniform and her badge, she was just another middle-aged woman who had made terrible choices and would now pay the consequences. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she stood up and looked directly at me. "I was just doing my job," she said. Even then, even facing 4 years in prison, she could not admit that what she had done was wrong. Some people never learn. 6 months later, I was back in my garage, but this time I was there by choice. I was organizing my tools and cleaning my workbench, reclaiming the space that had been stolen from me for so long. The coffee stains were gone. The papers were gone. Sheriff Williams' personal belongings had been removed as evidence and never returned. My garage was finally mine again. Linda found me there on a Saturday afternoon, sitting on the workbench where Sheriff Williams used to eat her lunch and file her false reports. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Different," I said. "Better, but different." "Any regrets?" I thought about that question for a long time. Sheriff Williams was in federal prison. Her career was over. Her reputation was destroyed. Her family had moved out of Cedar Falls in shame. Some people might say that was too harsh a punishment for parking in someone's garage. But those people did not understand what she had really done. She had not just parked in my garage. She had used the power of her badge to intimidate and threaten me. She had stolen money from taxpayers. She had violated the constitutional rights of multiple citizens. She had turned law enforcement into a personal profit center and a tool for bullying anyone who questioned her authority. "No regrets," I said finally. She made her choices. She chose to abuse her power. She chose to commit crimes. She chose to threaten me when I tried to stand up for my rights. Everything that happened to her was the natural consequence of those choices. The impact of the Sheriff Williams case went far beyond her individual punishment. The FBI investigation had revealed systemic problems in the Cedar Falls Sheriff Department that led to the resignation of 2 other deputies and a complete overhaul of internal oversight procedures. The county implemented new policies requiring body cameras for all interactions between law enforcement and citizens. They established an independent civilian oversight board to investigate complaints against police officers. They created mandatory training programs on constitutional rights and proper police procedures. Most importantly, they sent a message that badge or no badge, no one is above the law. I received dozens of letters from people around the country who had experienced similar abuse from law enforcement officers. Many of them had been too intimidated to fight back. Some had tried to file complaints and been ignored or threatened. Others had simply accepted the abuse as an unavoidable part of dealing with corrupt cops. My story gave them hope that ordinary citizens could hold police officers accountable when they broke the law. It showed them that patience, documentation, and determination could defeat even the most arrogant abuse of authority. But the most meaningful response came from a teenage boy named Marcus, who lived 3 streets over from me. He stopped by one evening while I was working in my garage. "Mr. Parker, I wanted to thank you for what you did." "What do you mean?" "Sheriff Williams used to hassle me and my friends all the time. She would threaten to arrest us for just walking down the street. She said we looked suspicious. But we never told anyone because we were scared no one would believe us." "I believe you." "I know. And now everyone knows what kind of person she really was. You proved that we do not have to be afraid of bullies just because they wear badges." That conversation reminded me why the whole ordeal had been worth it. It was not about revenge. It was not about getting money or seeing Sheriff Williams punished. It was about the principle that in America, everyone has rights, and everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. My garage door opener still works perfectly. Every evening at 5:30, I pull into my driveway, press the button, and drive into my own garage. It is routine, it is peaceful, and it is mine. But now I know something I did not know before. I know that when someone tries to take away your rights, you do not have to accept it. You do not have to be afraid. You can fight back and you can win.